Welcome to Criminologist. Today, we're diving into a mind-bending true crime story that shook America to its core. It's a tale of courage, twisted love, betrayal, and survival. This is the chilling story of the kidnapping of Barbara Jane Mackle. Barbara Jane Mackle was a 20-year-old attending Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Barbara's father, Robert Mackle, was a wealthy real estate developer and the co-owner of Deltona Corporation, one of the largest land development companies in the U.S. In 1968, the Hong Kong flu was rampaging through the student body of Emory University, and Barbara was one of the students afflicted by it. In December of 1968, Barbara's mother, Jane Mackle, drove from her family home in Coral Gables, Florida, to Atlanta to take care of her daughter and possibly take her back to Coral Gables for the Christmas holiday. As the school infirmary was full, they checked into a nearby motel called the Roadway Inn so that Barbara could recover and study for her final exams. On December 16, 1968, Barbara's boyfriend, Stuart Hunt Woodward, visited her at the motel and left a few hours later in the evening. On December 17, 1968, at around 4 a.m., a man claiming to be a police officer knocked on their motel room door. The man told Jane Mackle that there had been a traffic accident involving a white Ford. Jane, thinking that Stuart, Barbara's boyfriend, had been in the accident, opened the door. As soon as she opened the door, the man, who was wearing a mask, entered the room with a shotgun, followed by a smaller person wearing a ski mask. They knocked out Jane with chloroform and bound and gagged her. They then kidnapped Barbara at a gunpoint and forced her into a waiting car, a blue Volvo, which was parked outside. When Jane regained consciousness, she was able to free herself and quickly called the police. Robert Mackle, Barbara's father, was friends with then-President Richard Nixon, and after hearing about the kidnapping, the president himself asked the FBI director to handle the case personally. Within few hours, the kidnappers sent a ransom note to Barbara's family, asking for $500,000 in $20 bills. This equivalent to $3.5 million in the year 2021, factoring in inflation. The ransom note claimed that Barbara was buried but alive in a well-ventilated box with food and supplies which could last for up to 7 days. The note said that as long as the family complied with their demands, Barbara would be found alive. The ransom was to be delivered to a spot along Biscayne Bay by Robert Mackle alone, nobody else. The kidnapper had asked the family to place an ad in the Miami Herald after they agreed to the demands. Robert was determined to get his daughter safely back to her home and immediately raised the money and placed the ad. He left the suitcase containing the money at the instructed location just south of Miami along the Biscayne Bay. At around 5 a.m., a local resident awoke to a sound of outboard motor. When he looked outside, he saw a white Boston whaler being beached on a neighbor's lawn. The resident, concerned about the rising robberies in the area, called the police. As the local police was not notified of the ransom drop, 2 police officers responded to the call. Upon their arrival, they came upon 2 individuals, one carrying a duffel bag and the other carrying a suitcase and a carbine. Upon seeing the police officers, the individuals dropped everything and ran. The suitcase contained the ransom money while the duffel bag had scuba diving gear in it. Nearby, the police also found the Boston whaler and a blue Volvo, which contained documents showing the car's registration to George Deacon and photos belonging to the 2 kidnappers. The car also contained a photo of Barbara Mackle holding a sign which said, "Kidnapped." After the botched ransom pickup, Robert Mackle, fearing that the kidnappers would be scared off, placed an ad in the newspaper telling them they had nothing to do with the mix-up. The kidnappers called him again and provided a new drop location. This time, the ransom pickup was successful. Meanwhile, police traced down George Deacon to the University of Miami across the bay. The Boston whaler had been found to be stolen from the university a day earlier. Deacon's boss gave the police a name, Ruth Eisenman Shear, who also worked at the university and had spent time with Deacon. Even though the police were not able to find the couple, they were convinced that these were the kidnappers responsible for Barbara's kidnapping. Soon, the police discovered that George Deacon was actually an alias for Gary Steven Krist, a 23-year-old escaped convict from California. Gary Steven Krist had begun doing petty crimes at the young age of 14 when he was arrested for stealing a boat. A year later, he was again arrested for stealing a car and put in a juvenile facility in Utah for a year. In 1961, he was put into confinement but would escape shortly after. He later would be recaptured and spent a year in jail. In 1963, At the age of 18, he was arrested and sent to a jail in California for 2 car thefts. He was released in December of 1964. In 1966, Krist was married and had a son. He would again be arrested in 1966 for stealing 2 more cars, this time from a sales lot in San Mateo, California. He was convicted and was facing 6 months to 5 years in prison. Krist's second son would be born while he was in prison. Only a few months later, he would escape from the prison and remained at large for next 2 years. During this time, he changed his name to George Deacon and moved with his family to Boston. He looked through classified ads and found a job as research assistant at MIT. He was able to learn quickly at the job and was transferred to the University of Miami shortly after. It is here that he met Ruth Eisenman Shear, and both started having an affair. His wife found out about the affair and left him. She moved back to California with their 2 sons. Krist told Shear that he wanted to move to Europe with her, but for that to happen, he needed money. He devised a plan to kidnap a rich woman and planned to ask for $500,000 as ransom from her family, which they could then use to move to Europe. Shear agreed to the plan, and both started looking for a target. Krist then spent a lot of his time searching at the public library's social register for a potential victim. He wrote down about 100 possible rich women that he could kidnap and then narrowed it down to a list of 10. He eventually settled upon Barbara Mackle for his kidnapping. Krist researched everything about Barbara, from her family home in Coral Gables to her studying at the Emory University, and even the motel that she was staying at in December of 1968. On December 20th, 1968, nearly 15 hours after receiving the ransom money, Gary called the FBI via a switchboard operator and told them that Barbara's burial site was in a wooded area about 20 miles northeast of Atlanta. More than 100 agents fanned out throughout the area searching the woods for Barbara. Soon, they came across ventilation tubes protruding from the ground and started digging with their bare hands. 12 minutes later, Barbara was pulled out of the box. She was suffering from dehydration and lost about 10 pounds, but was otherwise in good condition. She had spent about 83 hours buried underground. Barbara was flown back to her home in her father's jet and was able to be reunited with her family. She was later able to tell her ordeal to the investigators. She recalled that after she was kidnapped from her motel, she was taken to the burial site, where she was asked to get inside the fiberglass box at the bottom of the pre-dug hole. She was told that the box was equipped with 2 ventilation tubes with a ventilation fan, a pump should it rain, food water, which was dosed with sedatives, a blanket, a battery-operated light, and a sweater. She was then asked to lay down in the box and hold a sign that said "kidnapped" on it. Said, "I just had to smile. I was thinking, if Daddy saw it, I didn't want him to think they had hurt me." She said the box was then screwed down and that she could hear dirt being shoveled over the box. She said, "I screamed and screamed. The sound of the dirt got farther and farther away. Finally, I couldn't hear anything above. I screamed for a long time after that." Meanwhile, Krist and his partner in crime, Eisenman Shear, had split up after the botched pickup before. After successfully picking up the money on his own, Krist traveled alone to Florida and purchased a sailboat using the money. He would be arrested in just 24 hours with all of the ransom money, except for the money he used to buy the boat in his possession. Eisenman Shear would be arrested 79 days later in Norman, Oklahoma. She was sentenced to 7 years in prison, serving 4 years before she was paroled and deported back to her native Honduras. Krist was sentenced to life in prison, but after serving just 7 years, knowing that he would be eligible for a parole, he started teaching classes to prisoners and trained as an EMT. He also developed a good relationship with the chairman of the Georgia Parole Board, saying that he intended to become a missionary after serving just 10 years in prison. He was released on a parole in May of 1979. His wife divorced him, and he married his pen pal, whom he met while he was in prison. After his release, Krist enrolled into a medical school in Alaska to become a doctor. However, since he was on a parole, he was not allowed to enroll into the college. He contacted the chairman of the Georgia Parole Board, who got him a pardon, and he was able to enroll and graduate from the medical school. He was able to land a job in Haiti, but would soon lose it after the employer learned about his background. He would get jobs in West Virginia, Alabama, and Connecticut, but lost them after the employers found out about his criminal past. He would then go on to practice medicine in a rural town of Indiana. Although the villagers knew about his past, they did not have a local doctor. However, after a local newspaper published a story on the specifics of Barbara's kidnapping, he lost his medical license. In 2006, Krist chartered a boat to South America. While on his return trip, he would be arrested for smuggling 38 pounds of cocaine on his sailboat off the coast of Alabama. He was also carrying 4 illegal immigrants on his sailboat who had paid him $6,000 each to enter U.S. The cocaine was worth $2 million. Krist had filled the box containing the cocaine with concrete and held the box with a rope. In case if he ever got caught, he could just cut the rope and release the evidence. But unfortunately, he was caught before he could cut the rope. During a search of his house, police found a large underground laboratory with a trapdoor and a 50-foot escape tunnel. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but only served 4. On August 27, 2012, Krist left the country while he was still on probation, sailing on his boat to Cuba and South America. A judge revoked his supervised release, and he was sentenced to 40 months in prison. Barbara would go on to marry her college boyfriend, Stuart Hunt Woodward. They would go on to have 2 children and lived in South Florida. Thank you for watching Criminologist. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the twisted true crime stories that shock the world, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Let us know in the comments, what do you think drives people like Krist to cross the line? Stay tuned, stay safe, and see you next time.